Hi folks, I'm Jack Kennedy and welcome to this virtual farm walk on the farm of Richard Marshall Farming outside Omagh, County Tyrone. Again, we would love to be doing this webinar or this farm walk in person, but given the ongoing restrictions with COVID, we have to do it virtually, and we are bringing you onto the farm virtually today. You all know at this stage that the DairyLink programme is brought to you with the full backing of Lakeland Dairies, MSD Animal Health, AFBI, CAFRI, Teagasc, and ourselves in the Irish Farmers Journal. You will have been following the progress of Richard's farm and other farms in the DairyLink programme through the pages of the journal or online. So to get down to business, before I introduce my guests, we're going to take a helicopter and a bird's eye view of the Marshall's farm. Then we'll come back to studio. I'll introduce you to the guests and we'll have a little bit of a chat about some of the aspects of Richard Marshall's farm. So let's start our virtual tour. Richard Marshall manages a herd of 130 dairy cows alongside his father John near Omagh, County Tyrone, supplying milk to Lakeland Dairies. Total area farmed is around 100 hectares. The majority of the cows calve down between September and February. A large portion of the land farmed is available to graze, and Richard is implementing a plan to make more use of graze grass on the farm. This includes improving soil fertility, measuring and budgeting grass, and improving the grazing infrastructure through the inclusion of additional access points to paddocks and drinking troughs. Richard is also concentrating on tightening the calving profile to improve fertility and reduce the additional labour demands associated with grazing part of the herd in spring and keeping the remainders indoors. Investment on the farm is ongoing. The Marshalls milk in a 12-unit herringbone parlour, and the most recent investment has been a new calf shed to allow the Marshalls manage all calves with the high standard they want to achieve. The Marshalls operate what is best described as a high input, high output autumn calving milk production system. Attention to detail is high with performance to match. Right, folks, welcome back to our virtual studio, and I'm joined by three guests: Richard Marshall, the host farmer; Aidan Cushnahan, the project coordinator for DairyLink, I suppose; and Jane Sayers, who's a local advisor to Richard Marshall in that area around Omagh. Richard, if I look to you first, maybe in terms of, if I'd ask you a simple question in terms of, we've seen a couple of clips of the farm there from a height and from ground level. Can you maybe kind of describe the farm to us, and I suppose what type of weather typically you get kind of in that kind of Omagh region?
Yeah, we live in West Tyrone, so we do have a relatively high rainfall compared to probably the east of the country. Maybe 50 to 60 inches of rainfall in the year. Yeah. Our soil type would be clay, but it would be a good enough clay, you know. We can grow plenty of grass, and sometimes the problem is utilising that grass in maybe prolonged wet periods.
Right, yeah. Jane, if I was to ask you in terms of Richard's farm relative to other farms in the area, like, I mean, is he any different? Is that farm that Richard has on the outskirts of Omagh, is it any different to a lot of the farms in the West Tyrone area, or typically how would you kind of describe Richard's farm?
Richard's utilising the grass to its best of his ability. The disadvantage we have is the annual rainfall here. You could get prolonged periods of wet weather, as Richard has said, where cattle have to be housed during the summer and then back out again. So farmers have been very flexible in trying to get their animals out to grass to make the most of the grass. The other opportunity the farmers have done, because we can get away with maybe a 2 or 3 cut system here, we're focusing on producing high quality silage, a big emphasis on that, because animals have to be housed for a period during the winter periods.
Yeah. And Jane, is there a lot of dairy cows in that region around Omagh?
Yes, it could be quite an intensive area for farming in the Omagh area and on down the Foyle Valley towards Strabane. It would be a great dairying country, so it would, and average family farm sizes would range from 880 cows upwards, you know.
Aidan, I mean, in terms of Richard's farm, and from you were there at the start when Richard first kind of joined the program, in terms of, I suppose, what he has done or what he has tried to do, we'll say, to kind of make, you know, some of the challenges that Jane just highlighted and Richard just talked about, the heavy rainfall, getting out to grass. In terms of some of the changes that Richard has done, you've seen a couple of those kind of happen over the last number of years, even though COVID has kind of, I suppose, interrupted kind of getting out onto the farm.
Yes, Jack. Hello there, everybody. I think it's fair to say Richard's farm, as with all the farms in the DairyLink project, faces its own challenges, and Jane and Richard have already alluded to that. But I think the thing you'll pick up from this presentation is that Richard's embraced that and has adopted some innovative and cost-effective solutions to help him make more use of the grass that he is capable of growing on the farm, be that grazed or conserved forage.
Yeah, Richard, I mean, bring us up to speed. Here we are, kind of, I call it the middle of September in terms of what's out at grass at the moment. Just give us a high level in terms of what cows are in, what cows are your autumn calving. So give us a kind of a feel for kind of what's outside, what's inside, and kind of a feel for ground conditions at the moment.
Ground conditions are great at the moment. August, there's maybe a few weeks in August we're wet, but ground conditions are superb even at the minute. We'll have our staler cows that are going to be dried off the next couple of weeks. They're out of grass full time, just getting some powder nuts. And our fresh cows, we have about 35 fresh cows. They're out during the day and they're fed at TMR at night.
Okay. So, I mean, would you class it as a kind of a good autumn up to now, a good August and a good September in terms of ground conditions? It's quite good relative to where you've been in the past, like, yeah.
Oh yeah, compared to this time last year, we had a lot of stock in, and this year a year makes a big difference in any farm, doesn't it? Absolutely. And you have to just work with the conditions you have. So we'll make use of it now when the conditions allow.
Correct. Yeah. So I mean, probably last year those fresh calvers, might you have let them out at all after calving?
No, they weren't out at all. No, they were just housed. As soon as when they calved, they stayed in. So it's a plus this year. You can't complain.
Yeah. Folks, I think to get a kind of another feel for it, let's watch another clip of some of what's happening on Richard's farm in the last week, 10 days. You can judge grass quality and soil fertility a number of ways, but when you see lush green grass blowing in the wind, you get a fair idea of what lies underneath. On this farm, a combination of improving soil fertility, reseeding, and infrastructure improvement all work together to grow more grass and subsequently allow marshals get more grass into cows that subsequently improves milk quality and cow welfare. One of the first steps to improving soil fertility was to take soil samples across the farm to establish the pH, phosphorus and potassium status of the paddocks. This was not aimed at necessarily increasing the amounts of input used, but establishing a better strategy where nutrients on the farm could be better distributed and any purchased inputs used more strategically. Growing the grass is one thing, but grazing in a high rainfall area is a completely different challenge. In this part of the country, a high rainfall level is experienced every year at a certain time of the year. To this effect, Richard has established a farm road network to allow him to get cows on and off paddocks with more ease. He has installed more drinkers to allow him back fence and front fence during wet weather. He has installed more gateways into paddocks to allow him to get cows on and off easier with less damage to the soil surface. Parts of the farm road surface have been upgraded to allow cows walk on the road easier. Cows that have a nice surface to walk on will walk better and faster, and there will be less lameness in the herd. All of these grazing infrastructure measures help the marshals grow more grass, but also use grass more efficiently. Jane, looking at that footage, I mean, it's clear that Richard and the focus is on kind of maybe trying to use grass and get more grass into the cows, because we see farm roadways, we see fencing, we see the tools that are needed to probably get cows out to grass. That infrastructure piece, I mean, it's important, especially when you talk about that field that that you're getting close to 60 inches of rain. Without it, you won't have anything like that. You won't be able to get out to the grass.
Yes, this was especially highlighted. The grass is the cheapest feed available on the farm, as we well know, followed by silage and then concentrates. And this was particularly highlighted at the time that the milk price crashed 2 or 3 years ago. So a lot of more emphasis has been produced by farmers and even in Richard to make the most of the grass on the farm, because we know that's the cheapest feed, followed then by the silage and then the concentrate. So Richard's trying to maximise his grass intakes in his cows and then producing his higher quality, high dry matter feed to feed to these higher yielding cows during the autumn period. And it's also a necessity because these animals need the energy intake to support that level of milk production.
I'm just sharing a screen there now. I mean, it's to grow the grass is important, and to do that you need a good soil fertility, we'll say. You've a couple of slides here now just to give kind of viewers and listeners a kind of a feel for Richard's farm in terms of soil fertility. The first slide here shows the kind of overall analysis, and then we're going to move into the pH, P and K in terms of how it looks on Richard's farm. Will you take it up there, Jane, in terms of that soil analysis slide we're looking at now?
This is a current soil analysis of the farm as we speak. And today the pH in this farm is 6.3, which is excellent because grass likes the pH to be above 6 to get high yields being achieved. Similarly, the phosphorus index is 2+, and the K index has been 2-. And since Richard has joined this farm project in 2019, the DairyLink project, he's focused on making the most of his soil fertility, because he realizes if he makes the most of his soil fertility, he'll achieve better grass and also better quality grass to feed to these cows. Initially, whenever the pH was done, 2019, only 65% of the farm was at a 6.1 pH or more. Okay. Focusing more on, as you can see there, addressing the issue of pH to get it correct. And indeed, in the business development groups also, Richard, we focused an awful lot on improving soil pH. You can see that Richard has spent a lot of time and effort in improving the pH in the farm, and you can see there's only a small proportion of the farm, which is in yellow and red, that's below the optimum level of 6 now, or 6.2.
When I'm looking at that, Jane, sorry to interrupt, but when I'm looking at that, the farmyard is down here. Am I right in terms of that white area, I'll call it? That's kind of where the farmyard is located. And then there's a block of land across the road, and then there's the main block of land here near the kind of adjoining the parlour, I'd say.
Yes, that is correct.
And then there's the third block away from the farm, and that's that land in the top right-hand corner.
Yes. That land in the right-hand corner has just recently been more emphasis being brought into focusing on the pH. And you can see there the pH is 6.2 in one of the fields, and the other two fields, Richard's going to try and improve the pH this year by putting on lime, 2 to 3 tons of lime to the acre to try and get the pH up so that it can get optimum grass growth and better utilization of nutrients from slurry and also fertilizer.
Okay, so this is a picture of 2021 in terms of soil pH. I'll say it's not bad. There's a couple of areas to work on, but it's not a bad place to be in 2021.
I think, Jack, it's fair to say actually it's also improved. It's an improving situation because Richard has been adding lime to pieces of land since that map was produced in the first place. So it's a developing situation as well. It's continuing to improve.
Okay, we'll come back to that, Aidan. Yeah, no, absolutely. In terms of soil P, Jane, take us up on this map.
This soil P, which is, if you can see, the dark blue represents a P index of greater than 3, and the lighter colours takes it down until a lower P index or of less than 2-. This is typical of any farm in North Tyrone. As you can see, most farms have too much phosphorus, or they have a greater phosphorus index of P or more, probably due to the accumulation of phosphorus being built up in the soils over the years through compound fertilizers being added prior to the nitrates, and also the amount of concentrate being fed through the cows and going back out in the form of slurry to the ground again. Okay, the field up in the top right, once again, that bit of land in the top right, you can see is deficient in the phosphorus, but Richard's focusing on the soil analysis, and that is one of the advantageous purposes of the soil analysis. It allows you to be field specific and to make sure that you're supplying the correct nutrients to the fields rather than just doing a blanket cover of slurry over the whole farm. Okay. And K, Jane? Potassium? Once again, the potassium levels, if you can take a look, the dark purple means it has an index of greater than 3 or more. The lighter index is less than 2-. From this graph, over the years, initially the potash index in this farm was 40% was deficient in potash, and the other 60% was ample 2- or more, which is optimum for grazing or silage production. More emphasis recently has been on supplying potash to the ground, especially the ground that's far away. And the unfortunate thing is in this area, if the weather's not favourable, you tend to run, if you get a window of opportunity, to put out the slurry in the areas closer to the house, and the areas further away are neglected. However, Richard is getting around this by supplying compound fertiliser to this ground that is more deficient in potash instead. And indeed, this autumn he's going to put on a bag of potash to the acre.
Okay. I mean, Richard, I suppose, Jane has shown us the maps. She's shown us kind of the situation in terms of pH, P, and K. I mean, how have you kind of worked with those maps over the last couple of years? Like, or how have you targeted, like she said, targeted the slurry or targeted the artificial P and K to kind of the paddocks where they needed it? How have you kind of worked around that? Or how in your mind does it kind of work on a daily basis to try and improve the paddocks that need a little bit of love, I'd say?
Well, I suppose it gives you a good guide. You can't work, you'd be working in the dark if you didn't. You'd be maybe applying lime or applying an expensive compound fertilizer to a field that doesn't need it. If we can identify which fields are deficient in a specific nutrient, then that nutrient management plan allows us to do that, effectively. So I can target my lime, I can target my muriate of potash to the fields that need it, not just sowing it for the sake of sowing it.
And lime, let's just take lime. Like, I mean, how have you typically what time of the year have you gone on, or was there any particular right time, or kind of how has it worked kind of in terms of getting out that kind of lime application?
Just depends, springtime or this time of year, either or, just whenever we can. Maybe if we were plowing a field and the man was there, we would maybe get another load and put it over a few grazing fields that have been grazed off. Or now this time of year, you could maybe call someday and you could put out a load or two, and just you sort of have to be flexible. And the same way with slurry. Do you do the slurry yourselves, or you work contractor, or how do you manage that piece? Springtime contractor comes and spreads, and after the silage we try and do it ourselves if we can.
And in terms of kind of a dribble bar or trailing shoe, or is it that, and kind of can you go on to paddocks, I suppose, that have a grass cover kind of, or how are you working that piece?
Springtime is trailing or dribble bar. We don't have any, this is not a normal splash plate at the minute with ourselves, so we can't really go after grazing with a splash plate at the minute. I think it would contaminate the grass for the cows coming back in again. But it would be something that we'll be looking into in the next year or so when the new legislation comes in.
Aidan, in terms of, I suppose, the other farmers and how they've worked with the soil maps and how they've worked with, I suppose, targeting the lime and the P and K to the weaker paddocks. Like, I mean, do you feel it's a tool that's working for the farmers? That they are actually improving on it by using the maps and by using the soil testing results?
Very much so, Jack. Look, the approach that we're adopting with all these businesses is to improve the economic, social, and environmental sustainability of those businesses. And the nutrient management plan that Richard has alluded to forms a cornerstone of that approach. The fact that they've gone out and they've analysed the soils on an individual field basis across the farm allows us to produce those nutrient management plans. We can go ahead, target the nutrients where they're needed exactly and where we can get the most benefit out of, and minimise any adverse effect from over application of nutrients such as phosphorus, for example.
Aidan, if coming back to kind of the slides that we were just kind of looking at, I mean, in terms of potash, it was probably one of the areas that I call it that the farm maybe was slightly lower than, or kind of toward the lower end of the scale in terms of where it was. Like, I mean, P was relatively good. There was a lot of phosphorus there. The pH wasn't bad. I mean, what would be the kind of science behind the K being lower, the potash being kind of relatively low, for Richard's farm?
That's an interesting question, Jack. And to be truthful, I don't think it's one that we've totally arrived at a satisfactory answer at. We could speculate and say that perhaps the result of our approach carried out was maybe using straight nitrogen over a number of years in the past, in combination with a lot of cutting going on. But we don't have a definitive answer on that. The fact remains, though, that's the situation as it stands at the moment. Richard has taken the steps, and he's able to take the steps to remedy that by putting on potash where it's needed, and he can identify the fields to see where he's going to get the biggest benefit from that. I think Jane and Richard mentioned earlier on that he's planning to go on with some muriate of potash at this time of the year to try and help remedy that situation.
Yeah, Richard, those fields across the road, we'll say, where that kind of slightly pinker color is, like, you know, because they're kind of, I call it, they're less than 2 minus. Like, I mean, would slurry have been getting out onto those paddocks kind of, or is it hilly or steep and you can't get with slurry kind of if it's wet, or kind of, is there a terrain challenge? I'll say they're getting slurry on those fields across the road.
Some of the fields there would have had slurry in the springtime.
Right.
Some of them wouldn't, either maybe with grass cover,
Yeah.
or maybe if weather just wasn't right, maybe it was a wee bit steep. We wouldn't have got slurry on it, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it did surprise me to see the potash deficiency in the farm.
Yeah. I mean, you're probably, I mean, as you say, you're trying to get a lot of grass in, and that parcel of land, even though it's across the road, is quite near to the farmyard, you know, so you're probably trying to keep grass on that for grazing as best you can. Like, but I think it's interesting, and I don't think there's a big problem, and it's easy fix the potash ones, you know, so I don't think it's an issue. Aidan, in terms of, I suppose, it's one thing growing the grass, and we're using the soil maps, and we're using the analysis to kind of target the nutrients at those particular heights. But I mean, managing the grass then is a whole kettle of fish, and you have all the challenges that Jane talked about in terms of rainfall, etc., and that kind of thing. I mean, talk to us a little bit about these couple of slides in terms of kind of, I suppose, utilizing the grass, or kind of making sure that it's grazed or harvested or whatever.
Yes, Jack. Well, it's one thing, as you say, measuring and producing the grass. It's another thing actually using it effectively. And what we've been doing with each of the project farmers who have been grazing cows is to encourage them to measure grass and assess the quality and quantity of grass that they have available to graze their cows, and manage those swards accordingly to make the most of them. So Richard, as with other farmers, has been measuring grass on a weekly basis to assess the covers on each field. That information is then entered into a software management package, which allows him to analyze the amount of grass he has about the farm, and he then can make decisions on how to manage that grass accordingly.
I mean, the wedge is a key part of that, you know, in terms of kind of just, again, maybe describe when we say the grass wedge, this is one for September. So this is one now where he is at the moment in terms of the grass supply on the farm. And obviously we're talking in total cover here, like, so it's, if 2,500 would be equivalent to 1,000 down, we in the Republic, we use the kind of available cover, so it's 1,000, you know, so 1,500 off that cover that you have there. So maybe talk to us about what we're looking at there in terms of that wedge.
Yes, well, ultimately, this is what Richard's producing when he enters those figures into that management software package that I mentioned earlier on. He's producing what we call a grass wedge. For those of you unfamiliar of what we're looking at here, basically this shows the quantity of grass that exists across the farm, whereby each green bar represents the grass cover measured in an individual field, whereby fields with the heaviest covers of grass are positioned on the left-hand side of the graph, and fields with the lightest covers are on the far right-hand side. The blue line that you see going diagonally across the graph represents the herd demand line, which is the demand for grass by the cows within Richard's herd. And ideally, what we're looking for is to turn those cows into covers approaching around 3,000 on that figure there, or 1,500 on the Republic of Ireland scale that you mentioned earlier on, Jack, and bringing cows out with a residual cover somewhere in the region of about 1,600 to 1,700 kilograms of dry matter per hectare, or about 100 kilos or so on the Republic's scale. You can see here, ideally what we're looking for here is to have that blue line more or less touching the tops of each bar on that graph. With the odd exception there, for this time of year, actually we're not doing too badly. There are some bars there slightly above the blue line, and if you were to interpret that strictly, that would suggest that there is an excess of grass there, which if left unchecked could build up. But what you got to bear in mind is, at this time of the year, Richard's drying off cows, so there will be less cows available to graze the grass, and grass growth rates will start to decline. So he's giving himself an opportunity maybe to build up a bit of grass that he can graze if the opportunity presents itself.
Richard, in terms of in the grass supply, I suppose that's there at the moment. I mean, you said at the start of the show that you were like, it's been an exceptional August and very good ground conditions at the moment. There's a splash of rain going around the country at the moment. But I mean, how confident are you of kind of keeping cows out of grass? I'll call it over the next kind of couple of weeks, as you know, as far as ground conditions can kind of allow. I mean, they're very good at the moment, but that could change, you know. But how confident are you in terms of grass supply of being able to keep cows out at grass?
Yeah, well, with the heat and the wee bit of moisture we've had over the last week or 10 days, the grass is growing out of the ground. It's really motoring ahead. I would like to think, unless the weather really turns bad over the next 10 days, I would like to think we'll get into the third week to last week of September, no bother, grazing dry cows and any steel cows we have.
Yeah.
But as I say, the weather can turn very quickly and you just don't know what's around the corner.
No, absolutely. And in terms of those cows that are calving now, will you continue to let them out, or kind of what's the plan kind of there for them?
Yeah, they'll be out as long as the weather permits. If it got very wet and cold, I think I would probably house them full time and just keep my other steeler cows out. But again, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
Yeah. The other piece, Richard, that we haven't touched off maybe enough is the changes that you have made in terms of infrastructure, in terms of farm roadways, or kind of, I think, we were prepping for this and you said in discussion, you hadn't actually spent a whole lot of money, but you did have a good infrastructure there. You had a kind of a good farm roadway structure there, but you made a couple of changes in terms of entrances. Just kind of talk to us about some of the kind of smaller changes that you've made to kind of make getting out to grass a little bit easier.
Yeah, well, we already had 3 good main lanes through the farm that take us, with good access to the paddocks, but we just maybe in wetter conditions, we're having to travel over fields, over grazed ground again. So we made extra gaps and bought a few extra drinking troughs. It's fairly simple, nothing fancy. And it allowed us now that in tricky conditions, we can graze and put a fence up and keep them off that ground, so they're going on a fresh area every day, so they're not tramping over ground that has already been grazed. Yeah.
You're crossing a road, obviously, Richard, to get across to that block across the road. Is it maybe just to give viewers it's not a very busy road, is it, or does it cause much of a kind of a nuisance, or does it kind of cause much of a hassle to kind of get the cows across?
You're speaking to probably the people on the road, it probably is a nuisance, but no, it's not too bad. It's not a main road by any means. There is cars on the road, but it's not a problem. I wouldn't count it a problem, getting them across the road.
Yeah. Am I right in saying, Richard, that land across the road is kind of more elevated and hilly, and that the land on the home side of the farm, or the parlour side, that maybe a little bit more low lying? Is that how you describe it? Is that kind of, yeah?
Yeah, it would climb, across the road, it climbs up a bit, but it would be fairly dry across the road. It's fairly good. If we get a chance at all, it's grazable.
Richard, if I was to ask you one kind of final question in terms of this whole space around soil fertility, grassland management, infrastructure, getting out to grass, etc., what do you feel over the last couple of years has been the one big change that has helped you get more grass into those cows?
I really think the infrastructure, it's the key to the whole thing. If you can't get onto the field, you can't graze it, so you can't make use of your grass. Our spring times, can be challenging around here. And if you have the infrastructure there ready to go, you can maybe get them out maybe that week, 10 days earlier than if you didn't have that. So that makes a big difference, I feel.
Yeah. Good man. I think you're dead right, as you say. And as Jane said at the start, you can grow the grass, but it's getting out and utilising it is one of the big challenges in a high rainfall area. Right, folks, I think we'll take a break there and we'll look at another short snippet of a video, again, getting maybe a feel for the cows, the type of cows that Richard Marshall and family have on this County Tyrone farm. So let's have a clip and have a look at some of the cows and what's happening on the farm at the moment. It's mid-September and milking cows are still grazing in Tyrone. A bit like the success of the Tyrone football team in 2021, the dry weather has suited grazing on this farm this year, with ground conditions excellent so far and growth rates for September well ahead of normal. The Holstein herd on the Marshall farm are high-performing cows. Richard and John aim for a functional cow that can walk to grass but yet deliver exceptional yields. For 2021, rolling average yield to date is over 9,000 litres per cow on about 3 tonne of concentrate fed, with high quality grass and high quality silage making up the biggest part of the forage component in the diet. Herd size has increased over the last 3 years, with average herd size jumping from 125 to 140 cows milked. Yield per cow has also increased with a combination of better feed, Better fertility and more mature cows aligned to top-class management, pushing milk solids, yield per cow over 700 kilos of milk solids produced per cow. Better fertility is driving higher yields. This year in September and October, over 90 of the 140 cows, that's over 65% of the cows to calve, will have calved down in the first 8 weeks. Previously, the peak of calving would not have been as high, and calving performance would have dribbled out over 9 to 10 months of the year. Dry cow management is an important aspect of starting lactation on the right foot, and the marshals will feed low potash silage to dry cows prior to calving to ensure herd health is optimised as cows start calving. If ground conditions allow, the marshals have no problem getting freshly calved cows back out to grass to make use of the high protein feed growing in the fields around Omagh in County Tyrone. Richard, I mean, we see lots of nice footage there of cows at grass and coming in from grass and coming in from grazing. Can you just again, I suppose, give viewers a feel for how many dry cows you actually have on the farm now at the moment, and how many are kind of going to be dried off in the coming weeks, because you have pretty compact calving pattern. So, I mean, talk to us about kind of rough numbers in terms of where you are at the moment. Here we are mid-September.
There's currently around 65 cows dry. There's probably around 30 of them to 35 out of grass. Just they're grazing, they're far away. You know, they'll not be calving for another 6 to 7 weeks. We have about the rest of them then are inside. We bring them in about 3 weeks before they're going to calve, and they're put on to silage straw based diet, and we top up pre-calver concentrate.
Okay, and the cows, Richard, that are out grazing by day now, in terms of the freshly calved cows, like they were inside full time. So were they on that straw concentrate diet before calving?
Yeah. We'll make a low potash silage especially for the dry cows, and we feed straw and concentrate. We've also grown a wee bit of whole crop that we're going to introduce into the dry cow and milking cow rations now over the winter time.
And Richard, my question kind of comes from, in terms of, they had no problem kind of adjusting to get them back out grazing after that kind of period indoors, like, or do they, you know, what's any problems associated with that transition piece?
No, you know, they're, again, the weather's in their favor. So, you know, they may as well go out and eat a wee bite of fresh grass during the day. I don't think it'll do them, it hasn't done them any harm. And they're still getting their silage and meal at night. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Aidan Cushnan, we've talked about this before in terms of kind of dry cow management and having them right target for condition score. I mean, if we were on the farm in Marshalls today, we'd probably be showing farmers, you know, what condition score is 3, what condition score we want, I suppose, at this time of the year. I mean, take us through again, I suppose, some of the kind of targets that farmers should know in terms of the whole dry cow space, and we'll move into the winter feeding piece then.
Yes, Jack, look, the principles here with condition score management for dry cows on Richards and the project farms are no different to what we'd be suggesting for any farms across the country. We're targeting a condition score at drying off of around 2.7 to 3 with a view to having those cows calving down about the same condition. If we can achieve that, we're looking at a 6 to 8 week dry period for those farms. Richard already alluded a bit about the diet that he's feeding, and we've been encouraging all the project farms to do the same. The reason why Richard highlighted that he's feeding a low potash or potassium forage is that we're trying to reduce the incidences of milk fever among those cows when they calve down. Forages which are high in potash tend to have a higher, what they call, dietary cation-anion balance, or a decalb value. And that increases the risk of those cows taking milk fever if they're consuming something like that. The diet that Richard has formulated there minimises that decalb value to reduce the risk. I suppose the other thing that we haven't mentioned there is that Richard's been working with his local vets to produce an animal health plan over the last number of years, and has been actively involved in selective dry cow therapy. I think you maybe want to add about that, Richard, how you've been finding that, what you've been doing in terms of selecting cows for sealant only or whatever.
And to add to that, I suppose, what proportion are you using kind of sealer only on, I suppose, at the moment?
Yeah, we're selecting cows with anything like a cell count below 150, so it is quite probably severe compared to what a lot. You've been what we read in papers and stuff. 200. We do go to 150. So we do try and do it well. We keep records of mastitis cases. So if there's any mastitis within 3 months previous to being dried off, that also comes in as a factor in it. Roughly, there's about 80% of cows are being used with sealers only. The rest are getting an antibiotic tube and a teat sealer as well.
I mean, what's very, very, very important on that, Aidan, I suppose you'll back me up on this, is that if you're going down that road, you need everything right. You need the milk recording, you need the cubicle space, you need the good management when they're in on cubicles. Like doing 80% with sealer only, like is not enough unless you have all those other boxes ticked.
Absolutely, Jack. Look, this is not a job you do half-heartedly. You need the milk records. You need the records of what cows have taken mastitis over the course of lactation. The way those cows are dried off is especially important. But Richard's been doing this for a number of years now and has found the approach successful enough. So it highlights that it can be done.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a moving piece, and I think the industry will move there over the next couple of years. I think you'll kind of more or less have to, but you need the key building blocks. Take us on in terms of, I suppose, winter feeding, and in terms of what's the kind of approach here for making good quality silage. Jane referenced it again at the start of the program, like in terms of making good quality silage, absolutely essential if you're milking indoors. Talk to us about what the process is here on this farm.
As you mentioned there, this is not in calving herd, Jack, so we are relying on having enough good high quality silage to maintain milk yields, milk components, and getting those cows back into calve. Richard's been using a 3-cut system, and ultimately what we're doing here is to try and produce a forage that has a target dry matter, some in the region of 25 to 30% dry matter, intake values of 100 or greater, and an ME or energy concentration exceeding 11.5 megajoules per kilogram of dry matter. That's in the past, and I suspect the plan will be the same, as to try and maintain the contribution of first cut silage for as long as possible through the winter. So there'll be forages, all our forages mixed in with that. And Richard's already talked about maybe some of the other things that he's perhaps doing to help contribute to that. Those cows, you can see in the picture there, they're fed a mixture of silage and concentrate in a total mixed ration, and then they're topped up in the parlour according to what milk they're given in a feed yield system.
I mean, Richard, in terms of what level of concentrate those fresh calvers now are starting off on in the parlour, like, I mean, and the TMR, just maybe give us a kind of a feel for kind of what kind of how you start them off and how you kind of build up in terms of concentrate.
Well, we try and feed a good level of meal in the wagon that sort of it doesn't create an acid load on the fresh calf cow, and in the parlour she's topped up gradually. We try and build her up over a period of maybe two to 3 weeks, so that she doesn't get a big quantity of meal at one time. So it's easier on the acid load on the stomach, and just it builds that fresh cow up so that she maybe can power on after that 3 weeks, that she's really fit and ready to go for consuming forage. And there is a high level of meat fed, there's no getting away from that.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of you called it a high level of meal in the forage valley. Are you up to, what are you up to in terms of 6-8 kilos of kind of as a base layer, we'll say, in terms of meal in that TMR? Yeah,
when they're fully housed, we would be in that 68 kilos region, and then topped up above that in the parlour.
Yeah. Jane, would that be typical of other autumn calving farmers in the area, we'll say, that have a kind of a good handle on calving pattern, etc., and that kind of thing? Would that be typical in terms of a kind of a high base level in terms of the TMR and then topping up in the parlour?
Yes, that is typical, Jack. One of the advantages of feeding more concentrate through the wagon combined with the silage, it reduces the risk of acidosis occurring. So at all times, the animals are getting a lovely balanced diet of energy and protein coming together and through the rumen, and you're building. Remember, these dry cows have calved and their intake was only 10, and you're building them up gradually. So as Richard says, you're not giving them maybe 6 or 7 kilos till day 21, and you're only giving them a third of a kilo of an intake gradually over that 21-day period to that 7 kilos. So, you're building them up, their intakes up, so that reduces the risk of acidosis, stomach upsets, and other issues as well.
Yeah. and the parlour allows you to top it up then in terms of individual milk yield, etc., and that kind of thing.
The other point that I'd like to say is that you have more concentrate efficiency. If you have cows all calving together, you have them all together in one batch, so you have better utilisation of concentrates as well. Whereas in a spread calving, there's cows being oversupplied and undersupplied.
You're dead right. I mean, Aidan, in terms of the type of cow that we have on this farm, on the Marshall farm, we'll come to the performance figures, which are exceptional in the next slide or two. But I mean, in terms of breeding and sire selection, in terms of whether it's the PLI system or the EBI system or what's important, I mean, take us through this slide in terms of what you see and what kind of the project has kind of the criteria it sets for sire selection.
Yes, Jack. Well, look, I suppose, this is one of the cornerstones of the project, where we have been directing the project farmers to look at producing a cow that is more sustainable in the long run in terms of producing milk solids and being more fertile and have a longer lifespan accordingly. So what we've done is develop a set of selection criteria to select sires based on the PLI system or EBI system, which helps those farmers pick out sires from the various catalogues or sire lists, whatever they're getting put in front of them here. To go into that a bit more detail, if you look at the PLI system there, we've set aside a set of criteria there whereby we're looking at the PTAs, or predicted transmitted abilities, for milk, butterfat percent, and protein percent deviation and fertility index, where we aim to select sires that have a PTA for milk greater than or equal to 100 kilos, PTA for butterfat percentage of greater than or equal to plus 0.08%, and the same for protein percent. In terms of fertility index, we're looking at sires there with a fertility index greater than or equal to 5 days. The EBI system, you can see on the right-hand side there, numbers may differ from what you see on the left-hand side, but the principle is the same, and that we're looking to select sires that will produce stock that have enhanced capacity to produce butterfat protein and are more fertile.
Richard, I mean, we haven't mentioned it yet. Like, I mean, but you had a TB problem on the farm, and like a lot of farms in Northern Ireland. But thankfully, as you say, it's in the background, it's in the history. But you had to go out and buy cows. You had to go out and source cows. I mean, in terms of what you were looking for when you went to buy actual cows, kind of give us a feel for what kind of type of cow that you were looking for this kind of system that you're running.
Yeah, well, we do look for a cow that can supply us with plenty of milk. We are an autumn calving herd, and it is a Highland herd. But we also wanted a functional cow, that is robust and will last. And that in the springtime, it's just capable of off grazing, that is hardy enough and will go out and graze. So it's difficult, it's difficult to find a cow that matches all that when you're out buying an animal.
It is. Yeah, it is.
But you have to try and find what you can and work with what's in front of you.
And Richard, do you mind me asking, did you buy in heifers or cows, or what kind of what did you, or what, look at it depends what's on the market, but what did you kind of ideally want to get, and what did you end up buying?
Majority of them was been freshly calved heifers. I suppose that's you're buying the best genetics there, and you like to think that they're likely going to last longer and be around with you longer, and yeah, that's what we bought, just mostly heifers.
Aidan, I mean, it's an autumn calving herd, as you say, and just take us through this graph here in terms of, this is a bar chart showing the kind of number of calvings per month, and we're seeing it up at 60 in September.
Yes, well, herd fertility performance will have a major impact on the sustainability of all these farms and businesses throughout the country. What Richard's been very successful in doing is actually tightening up that calving pattern, whereby you can see the majority of the cows calving over that, and heifers calving over that lifespan between September and December, projected for this year. There are advantages with that. I think, look, you and Jane alluded to that already. From a feed perspective, he can feed those as one group and gain the feed efficiencies from that. Richard might want to comment as well. Look, we've heard this from other farms when we've discussed it in the past, in terms of from a social point of view, that it eases the workload throughout the year. While you might have a concentrated period of work when you're calving those cows now, you're not calving cows throughout the year, and it frees up time to do other bits of work on the farm as well.
Do you find that, Richard? Is it helter-skelter at the moment?
Yeah, it's busy at the moment now. I can definitely agree with that. But yeah, I suppose it leaves it that you're concentrating on one aspect. It leaves even your heifer rearing a lot easier. We aim to have all our replacements born, by the second week in October. So it leaves in a nice uniform batch of heifers in the springtime that you can work with, and you don't have maybe 3 batches of heifers at all different ages.
Yeah, I mean, you're dead right. I think a lot of farmers would say that, in terms of young stock management, you don't have those kind of, you mixing age groups, like we'll say, you don't have those problems, and then you have 10 groups of animals around the farm. You can manage them as a group with a kind of relatively large number, especially for grazing or for feeding. Like, yeah. I mean, Aidan, that pattern that we're looking at there on the screen, like, I mean, it's good, like, in terms of,
Absolutely.
like, you've 90 odd calvings in September and October, out of a total number of calvings of what are we talking about in this farm? 150 or 100, something like that.
Approaching that, Richard, wouldn't it be?
Yeah, between heifers and cows, the whole lot.
Yep.
Like, yeah. So you're getting well up there in terms of your targets. You're getting well up there in terms of actually, comparable to a spring scenario. Like, I mean, you're getting close enough to kind of those kind of targets in an autumn scenario. Like, I mean, Aidan, moving it on then to kind of, I suppose, the type of cow. This is very different to a spring scenario in terms of performance, because you're looking at, a lot more input, but an awful lot more output as well.
The numbers are different, Jack, but principles in some ways are essentially the same. And that, it's while people might be prepared to accept a more spread calving pattern in an autumn calving scenario, it's having a tight calving pattern, as you've seen there, is every bit as important as in the spring calving scenario. But to maybe concentrate on these figures here, Richard and I produced a set of targets for the business over the duration of the project to give the business something to focus on in terms of milk yield, solids, and feed efficiency. You can see those figures are all on the table on the top of the slide here, spread from 2019 through to the current year. And what you can see in the table below are actually what was recorded over those periods in 2019, 2020, and the rolling 12-month performance in 2021 up to the end of June. Put it into context, you're right. Like, if you look at those yield figures there, you can see we're looking at a herd average, trying to target around 8,500 litres of cow per year, with solids production of just approaching 650 kilos of milk, with a feed efficiency probably approaching somewhere in the region of about 0.32 kilos per litre. And the object was to gradually improve that milk yield and have a sustained focus on improving milk components to get more milk solids. You can see there what has happened. Well, we mentioned some of the circumstances earlier on that in the project that had some impact in the milk yield. Average milk yield in 2019 just slightly below 8,200 litres a cow, but that has rapidly built up to the situation where currently cows in the herd are averaging around 9,300 litres per cow per year, with solid production under around 720 kilos a cow. And that has had a significant impact on the financial performance. Richard records the performance of his cows there through the DARA margin over concentrate calculator. So it gives us an idea of what's happened from a monetary point of view on an annual basis. And you can see that margin over concentrate back in 2019 was in around £1,650 a cow, and currently it's in around £2,000 a cow.
I mean, it's for me looking at it, it's exceptional performance. It's also, I'll say, I mean, in terms of the concentrate piece, is there any reasoning behind that? Like, we'll say, if you look at the targets at the top were 2.6 ton, you're kind of feeding, I call it closer to 3 ton. It's up 300 or 400 kilos per cow. Like, I mean, to get 3 ton of concentrate into a cow, it is a lot of feeding. Like, we'll say, is there any kind of explanation behind that, or kind of where's the thinking on that?
I think probably, Jack, that's a reflection of part of the journey Richard's been on here. And if you take the overall picture here, it's a combination of a number of factors. The fact that Richard calving pattern was slightly spread would lead to certain feed inefficiencies, which may suggest those feed rates were slightly higher initially. I think when we looked at this at the very start of the project, the feed rate was in around 0.37 kilos per litre. Currently, while there's quite a lot of feed still being added there, I grant you that, the feed rate accordingly to produce that amount of milk is around 0.31 kilos per litre. Okay. So there are feed efficiencies being achieved there. And it's that's down to a combination of things. I've been looking here just at his individual monthly figures over the last number of years. If you look at the April to June period, for example, in 2019, and compare that with April to June in 2020, over the space of 12 months in that period, there was an improvement in milk from forage of about 4 litres a cow per day, which roughly translated amounted to saving around 20 tonnes of concentrate for the herd. The fact that he has a more tightly calving pattern now would suggest also that there's also potential to make even better use of the winter feed that he's putting in front of those cows, because as you mentioned earlier on, Jane alluded to, cows in a tight calving pattern will benefit more from the feed pattern that's set up there, as opposed to cows that are in a more spread calving pattern.
Jane, in terms of that type of performance, like even if you just take 2021 today, to kind of like you're looking at 9,300 litres, 720 kilos of milk solids. Of your clients, we'll say, that are in this system, like, I mean, are they achieving what kind of this Marshall farm is achieving at the moment? Like,
there are a few in the area that are achieving that level of performance, but it's all down to attention to detail, focusing on making excellent silage, because these cows are being housed during the winter period, and then supporting them with a certain level of concentrates being fed to yield through the parlour, monitoring their performance so that they all are fed, bred, and managed together. And the benefit then with the autumn calver, once she goes back out to grass and you give her sufficient grass, and very important to give them a good herbage allowance or good grass allowance to be able to support the high yield milk yields whenever they go out to grass. They pick again and they give you a few more additional litres of milk again.
Yeah. I mean, Aidan, are you surprised, like, in terms of how it, like, there's been a significant, I'll call it, increase there, we'll say, even from 19 to 20 to 21 in terms of actual performance, 8,200 litres, up to 9,200, up to 9,300 again in 2021 to date. I mean, is there a herd maturity piece there happening, I suppose, as we move, as you know, as the herd grows, like like, and again, we're looking at an expansion scenario here. Like, you know, we're looking at 126 cows in 19 up to 140. So we've more cows, yet we're producing more per cow. That doesn't often happen, especially in those kind of high performing, high input situations.
I think the figures there are quite remarkable, Jack, when you look at them, and it's all credit to Richard for getting to where he is at the moment. And yes, I don't think there's one single factor. The maturity of cows, I think, will have an influence up there. But look, there are a number of things going on there as well. Look, if Richard wasn't adopting some of the things in terms of managing that grass more effectively when they're out there, ensuring that they had good quality forage in front of the cows, getting those cows back into calve, all those things come into play.
I mean, we're talking about actual performance here now in 2021, and earlier, just a couple of minutes ago, we talked about the breeding piece and kind of, I suppose, the focus that has been turning to breeding. Even if I go back to that slide where we showed the kind of, I suppose, the targets, like, I mean, when the stock that you're actually breeding or have bred over the last kind of 2 or 3 years, when they start coming back into the herd, I mean, it probably will improve the solids and improve the fertility even more so, it's probably fair to say.
Yes, Jack, those criteria that you can see on the slide are, relatively speaking, fairly tight selection criteria when you start going through the sires to actually see what actually meet that criteria from an entire list of sires that are available. And yes, I would imagine what stock is coming through over the next few years will significantly add to the milk solids yield that's already being generated on that farm.
Richard, I mean, we've been talking to Aidan and Jane, I suppose, about the performance and the exceptional performance of the herd in terms of volume and in terms of litres, and we're just saying that when the kind of young stock that you're breeding now come into the herd, I mean, you'll probably see improvements in terms of milk solids, fat and protein, you know, in the coming years as that better breeding and that better fertility type stock come into the herd.
Yeah, we've been selecting all the bulls the last couple of years. We've made sure that there's been a good, fat and protein correlation in that. So I would like to think that we'll be able to maintain yield yet still have, improved solids as well, not have one without the other.
Yeah, I mean, like the volume is exceptional, but you're saying that it's not all that increase in solids is not coming from volume alone. It's definitely coming from a focus on. Aidan, have we any numbers on that in terms of the?
It is starting to come through already. There, just looking there, going from 2019 to 2021, there's been an 8-point increase in water fat percentage and a 7-point increase in protein percentage. As I mentioned earlier on, if you consider some of the breeding decisions that Richard made over the duration of the project, and when those crosses actually enter into the herd, we'd like to think that should progress even further.
Richard, in terms of that concentrate input, I mentioned it to Aidan again, in terms of that concentrate input, it's kind of heading, give or take, for 3 ton of feed per cow. I mean, do you see that increasing, or where do you see, but Aidan quite correctly said, like, the efficiency is still good, I mean, the efficiency of that feed is still good, but do you see that kind of increasing any further, or kind of is that kind of where you kind of see it topping out at?
Well, that's where I'd like to see it, topping at around 3 ton, I think. With the leaders we're achieving, as I said, we're still fairly efficient. But I would think once you cross the 3 ton mark, unless there's a lot more milk, which I'm happy with yield at the minute. I'm not pushing for 11,000 litres. So, I think that would be fairly where we are at the minute, where we'd like to stay and maintain that,
And you think that grass still has a part to play in that type of cow, in that type of a feed input? You see definite benefits to kind of getting more grass into that, even I call that a high performing, high output cow. Like, you see grass still playing a role.
Okay, yes, the springtime all the way through to to now, really it plays a big role. It's for both myself and ease of management over the summertime, and for cost effectiveness for our business. I can't see why we would ever stop that grazing aspect of that.
Jack, I think it's important to add in there the fact that Richard has achieved such a tight calving pattern there means that by the time he has his cows in the calve and they're approaching the springtime there, most of the milk has been produced off the herd anyway. So he's entering a situation whereby a grass at a moderate level of feed should more than meet the needs of the cows at that stage of lactation.
Yeah. So what you're saying, Aidan, is when Richard turns out the cows in March, April, depending on weather, etc., all that kind of thing, that he has, he's over the peak. He's 60-70% of his milk produced for the year, and then he's looking to kind of get good performance off grass and a certain amount of concentrate right through the summer. And Richard, that's where you see the benefit in terms of management. The wagon is turned off at that stage. I call it, the yard is shut down to an extent.
Yeah, it leaves that you can have a lifestyle in the summertime. You're really dealing with a steel cow that's in calve and she's heading towards being dried off in July. You're dealing with a cow that's easy managed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Richard, I mean, last question for you in terms of, I suppose, what did, in terms of the program and what happened over the last couple of years, what was the one part of it? Like, we've talked about a number of aspects, and we featured your farm before in terms of calf rearing and that whole investment in a new calf shed and what has happened there, and that you have invested on the farm to again help that whole labor efficiency. I mean, what has in terms of what has stood out for you over the last 2 or 3 years in terms of a piece of information or a piece of performance or a tool that has helped you run the farm better? What has been the piece that stood out for you?
Well, really, it's the tightening their calving pattern is really it was something that we're always thinking of doing, but we never actually went and done it. And suppose we got encouragement to do it, and now we're seeing the benefits of it in our business. I think it's made a big difference to our farm, over the last couple of years, and it's probably going forward, it's maintaining that. Doing it for 1 year is fine, but it's keeping that performance and keeping that tight pattern over the next 3 and 5 years.
No, I think you're dead right. Absolutely. Jane, in terms of other farmers in the area and what they can learn from something like what Richard Marshall and family are doing there outside Omagh, is there lessons for other farmers in the the greater Tyrone area, do you think?
Yes. Richard, not only attention to detail, but also adopting. He's got a view in life, and he goes and he's prepared to try things and experiment. And one of the things that he brought on, that his father was there, but he brought on automatic calf feeders. He's brought feed to yield. He's looked at the soil analysis, and he's went furthermore looking at individual fields and feeding nutrients to each field individually, so that he's not wasting fertilizer, wasting money, and attention to detail and his feeding and management of his dairy cows. So it's a holistic approach.
Correct. And I mean, Aidan, you've referred to that before, that it's not one aspect that's delivering on this Marshall farm. There's a little bit of everything, but it's doing everything right. But grazing, breeding, soil fertility, they're all fundamental pillars to kind of achieving that performance.
I think, look, those cornerstones that you mentioned, Jack, should be adopted as cornerstones right across the industry, regardless of the system, because look, ultimately, whether you're grazing or feeding silage, you need to produce plenty of quality material, and you need to get those animals back into calf.
Right, folks, I think again we've given you a kind of a snapshot of what's happening on this Marshall farm, I suppose, in mid-September in 2021. But I mean, it does give us a feel for kind of what's important to farmers, not alone in Tyrone, but across Northern Ireland. And I mean, there are other farms that we have featured, whether it was Stephen Wallace's farm in County Tyrone last week. Again, there are other farms in the DairyLink program that are showing similar benefits and similar strengths to doing things right. So I think, look, we're very lucky as farmers to be able to have the likes of Richard to kind of share his knowledge and to share his information and to kind of give us a feel for what's working on his farm. And without ambassadors in the industry like Richard, I don't think any of us could kind of learn from and change as we move into a whole new set of scenarios and a whole new set of rules into 2022 and beyond. Look at folks, the program wouldn't be possible without the backing of the sponsors, Lakeland Dairies, MSD Animal Health, AFBI, Caffrey, Teagasc, and indeed all our colleagues in the journal. So look, without that, it's a pity we couldn't bring you in person from Richard Marshall's farm, but we brought you as best we could in terms of virtual what's happening at the farm at the moment in mid-September. So thanks to my guests, Richard Marshall, our host farmer today, Aidan Cushnahan, who is the coordinator of the DairyLink project across Northern Ireland, and Jane Sayers, who is the local advisor to Richard in the Omagh, County Tyrone area. And Richard is one of our clients among other clients in that area. So thanks to all our guests and thanks to everyone for watching and listening today. We'll be back again soon with more from DairyLink Programme Ireland.